Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have a great show for you today. We have an excellent guest. We're going to be talking a little later about naval matters, so stay tuned. If you could, please do hit the like button and also the subscribe button. It really helps us out, promotes us on the old YouTube algorithm. You can also check us out on Twitter and Blue Sky. We post some updates there from time to time. And of course, we have our website, Tochnyi.info. There's a lot more detailed information there, articles and interactive maps and other things like that. So check out Tochnyi.info when you've got the time. Chat, if you guys have any questions during the broadcast, please do type them in the chat. Or if you're watching after the fact, leave them in the comments. We'll do our best to get to all your questions at the end of the broadcast. So without any further delay, I should just mention really quick the show order. I'll present the news, then that'll be followed by Mr. Germany to Ukraine's report. That'll be followed by Stanimir's report on the Russian economy. Then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the Black Sea and with the Navy stuff, and then we'll go to Q&A. So I will now present the news. These are the main headlines as of January 25th, 2026. First up, we have operations. Ukraine's defense forces reported carrying out strikes on two targets, the Penza Neft oil depot in Russia's Penza region and the Podolyot radar station in Crimea. According to the general staff, after the strike on the oil depot, a fire was observed at the facility. The full scale of the damage is still being evaluated. The operation took place on the night of January 22nd. Drones operated by the Alpha Special Operations Center within Ukraine's security service hit infrastructure at the Tamon Neftgaz oil terminal in Russia's Krasnodar territory. The terminal is one of the largest ports in the Black Sea region, handling shipments of oil, gas, and ammonia. The site stores complex petroleum products and liquefied gas and has a capacity exceeding 1 million cubic meters. The strike was said to have damaged technical pipelines located at the berths and also several tanks holding vacuum gas oil, along with tanks used to store fuel oil. Shutoff valves were also said to be affected, causing petroleum products to leak and then catch fire. The fire was estimated to have spread across roughly 7,000 square meters. Initial damage assessments cited by Ukrainian sources placed the total damage around $50 million. During the night of January 20th, Ukraine's defense forces carried out a missile strike on the Michurinskaya gas turbine combined heat and power plant in Belgorod, which is operated by GT Energo. The governor of the region confirmed the incident in a telegram post, stating that the strike affected facilities tied to the region's energy system. He reported that work was underway to clear explosive hazards and begin urgent repairs, and added that one of the impacted sites also suffered damage to buildings and equipment. The attack was described as involving missiles. Russian monitoring accounts on social media claim that roughly 25 missiles were launched in the direction of Belgorod. Details published on GT Energo's website list the Michurinskaya plant as having electrical output of 24.2 megawatts and a heat output of 80 gigacalories per hour. The facility mainly provides power and heat to production areas and office buildings associated with the Belenergomash BZEM plant and is not connected to the city's centralized heating network. The plant was described as having about half the capacity of the Luch thermal power plant and the Belgorod thermal power plant, both of which have been targeted previously. A Ukrainian ground drone known as MAL carried out a successful evacuation of an injured soldier who was transported inside the drone's armored capsule. The 1st Separate Medical Battalion said the mission was conducted jointly with the 53rd Separate Mechanized Brigade. The need for a rapid evacuation arose after a soldier from the brigade was wounded by gunfire during a battle and ended up in a contested area between positions. Commanders decided to attempt an emergency extraction using unmanned ground vehicles. The situation was especially difficult because the wounded serviceman was effectively located beyond opposing lines. The brigade made 8 evacuation attempts, but continued pressing the operation despite repeated setbacks. The 1st Medical Battalion then joined the effort, and the team chose to deploy a MAL ground drone fitted with a protective capsule. After multiple failures and the loss of 2 drones, the 11th attempt succeeded. The injured soldier was retrieved, taken to a secure area, and given required medical care. The mission covered a route of 64 kilometers and lasted 6 hours. The MAL Unmanned Ground Vehicle project was developed after the 1st Medical Battalion requested a mobile system capable of evacuating casualties in challenging conditions. The platform is built using a quad bike frame powered by an internal combustion engine. Ukraine's president said the first shipment of industrial boilers from Italy has already arrived in the country, adding roughly 116 megawatts of extra power generation capacity as Ukraine works to cope with damage to its energy system from Russian strikes. Speaking with reporters on January 20th, he said the equipment is intended to help keep energy networks stable throughout the winter. He did not disclose where the boilers have been installed, explaining that revealing those locations could increase the risk of additional attacks. He also said Ukraine is expecting further deliveries. He noted that the shipment is linked to agreements reached with Italy's prime minister and said that he has also raised Ukraine's energy needs in talks with other European leaders, including Germany's chancellor. The head of Ukraine's presidential office said that the second phase is planned over the next 6 months, during which Ukraine is expected to receive more than 300 additional boilers, totaling to 806 megawatts in capacity. He added that the equipment will be sent to communities that have suffered the most severe damage and described the deliveries as especially important because power and heating facilities continue to be targeted. The European Union is also sending Ukraine a new shipment of emergency generators from its own strategic reserves as Ukraine's energy infrastructure continues to come under Russian strikes. U.S. Southern Command reported that it intercepted the oil tanker Sigida in the Caribbean Sea, describing the vessel as connected to Russia's Shadow Fleet. The command said this was the 7th interception conducted under an operation focused on tightening enforcement of sanctions tied to the illicit export of Venezuelan oil. The Sigida is registered under the Panamanian flag and is owned by Sunoco Limited, a company based in Hong Kong. The report notes that the U.S. Treasury sanctioned the company in January of 2025 over its role in moving Russian crude oil. Maritime tracking information cited in the report indicates that the tanker previously carried Russian oil before later shifting to transporting Venezuelan crude. Over a 3-year period, it reportedly moved crude from ports in the Baltic and Pacific regions to destinations in China and India. The vessel itself was placed under U.S. sanctions in August of 2025. U.S. Southern Command moved into a more active stage of its effort to block illicit Venezuelan oil exports starting in early December of 2025. On December 10th, U.S. forces intercepted the tanker MT Skipper in the Caribbean Sea. The report stated that the Skipper had been under sanctions since 2022 because of ties to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Russian Shadow Fleet, and it was carrying Venezuelan crude when it was detained. On the 20th, U.S. forces took control of the supertanker MT Centuries. On January 7th, U.S. authorities intercepted 2 vessels in separate areas. The MT Sophia in the Caribbean, a sanctioned Shadow Fleet tanker operating without national registration. In the North Atlantic, the tanker Marinara, previously known as Bella 1, was detained after a 2-week pursuit. On January 9th, U.S. forces seized the MT Olena in the Caribbean Sea, and finally, another interception occurred on January 15th, the tanker MT Veronica. The vessel was reported to be flying the flag of Guyana and was described as linked to the Shadow Fleet. Up next, we have international relations. Moldova is moving to formally cut its remaining legal ties with the Commonwealth of Independent States, the Moscow-led post-Soviet grouping. The effort was launched by the Foreign Affairs Ministry and is being overseen by the Deputy Prime Minister. It involves withdrawing from the 3 core documents that serve as the legal foundation for Moldova's membership, a step presented as consistent with the country's declared intention to continue on a European path. The CIS was created in 1991 by Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus after the Soviet Union broke apart, with the goal of keeping loose connections among former Soviet republics in a structure loosely modeled on the British Commonwealth. The bloc is widely seen as having limited practical influence, with participation often viewed mainly as a political signal of closeness to Moscow. Georgia left the CIS in 2009 after Russia's 2008 war with the country, while Ukraine stopped taking part in 2018 during the 4th year of Russia's military campaign. In an interview on January 19th with Radio Moldova, the Deputy Prime Minister said the government had already begun the legal steps to lead the CIS. He explained that ending Moldova's adherence to the CIS charter signed in Minsk on January 22, 1993, along with the original founding document signed on December 8th in 1991 and its annex from December 22nd, 1991, would complete Moldova's formal exit from the organization. He said Moldova had largely already been absent in practice for some time, but that its membership still existed on paper. The Moldovan media organization Newsmaker reported that momentum for a full withdrawal increased after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Since then, Moldovan authorities have steadily scaled back involvement in the bloc, arguing that many of its agreements are outdated or not used. On June 20th of 2023, Moldova's parliament withdrew from the CIS Interparliamentary Assembly Convention, saying that the institution conflicted with Moldova's European ambitions. The deputy prime minister said that Moldova had entered into 283 agreements within the CIS framework. Of those, he said that 71 had already been terminated, and about 60 more are currently in the process of being terminated. He stated that many of the arrangements are outdated or were never put into effect. Moldova also stepped back from symbolic cultural cooperation with Russia. At the end of 2025, the parliament withdrew from a cultural agreement with the Russian Federation, leading to the closure of the Russian Science and Culture Center in Chisinau. The culture minister said that the center did not function as a genuine cultural institution and instead served as a front for activities aimed at weakening Moldova's sovereignty. Polish citizens who volunteered to serve in Ukraine's armed forces in the fight against Russia are expected to be protected from punishment in Poland, even if they left without completing the formal authorization process required under Polish law. A draft bill would exempt such volunteers from legal responsibility and would also extend relief to people who were already prosecuted or convicted. Poland's Parliamentary Defense and Justice Committees reviewed a report from a subcommittee that had been working on the proposal since autumn. The committees approved a series of amendments, including provisions that would eliminate criminal liability for those who joined Ukraine's military without official permission and would introduce an amnesty for individuals who face charges or receive sentences for doing so. Lawmakers said that the amnesty clause was necessary because some volunteers had already been taken to court and convicted, including in cases where verdicts are final. The committees also plan to recommend that the exemption apply retroactively, starting from April 6, 2014, rather than beginning on February 24, 2022. The earlier date is presented as reflecting the true start of Russia's military actions against Ukraine. Under the version supported by the committees, the law would cover actions that occurred before the new rules took effect. Poland's defense ministry has indicated that it's open to consider a longer time window for the exemption. The draft law states that offenses based on serving in Ukraine's military without the required authorization would be treated as forgiven and legally void. It would also prevent prosecution for recruiting volunteers to join Ukraine's armed forces. The bill is described as applying only to participation in combat against Russia as part of Ukraine's armed forces, which are characterized as operating under lawful authority recognized by Poland. It also introduces a reporting requirement for anyone who served without proper approval. Within 6 months, they need to submit a written notice to the defense minister stating when and where their service began and ended. The information provided in the notification would be treated as classified and used for the needs of Poland's armed services. Under Poland's Homeland Defense Act, service in a foreign military or foreign military organization is permitted only with the defense minister's consent. It adds that an earlier law in force in 2014 and still applicable as of February 24, 2022, allowed such service if permission was obtained from the Interior Minister after consultations with the Defense and Foreign Affairs Ministers. And last item this week. Delegations from Russia, Ukraine, and the United States met in Abu Dhabi on Friday for joint peace talks in what was described as the first publicly known three-way meeting of this kind since the full-scale invasion. After the first round, a White House official told NBC News that the talks were constructed and expected to continue until the next day. Russia's state news agency TASS also reported that the sides planned to resume discussions on Saturday, the 24th, citing a source who said there was an agreement to keep going and that no party was walking away. Before the meeting began, Ukraine's president said the delegations were expected to focus on territorial issues, with a particular attention to Donbass. In his evening address, the Ukrainian president said the delegations were working through the basic conditions for ending the war, but cautioned that it was too soon to make firm judgments about what the negotiations might produce. He said the next day's discussions would show how the talks develop and whether they could lead to concrete outcomes. The talks in Abu Dhabi followed a meeting between the Ukrainian president and the U.S. president in Davos on Thursday, and Russia's president held a late-night meeting in Moscow with a U.S. envoy and the U.S. president's son-in-law. After that meeting, a Kremlin foreign policy aide said that the discussions lasted 4 hours and were, quote, detailed, constructive, and unusually direct. He repeated Russia's position on territorial matters, citing the formula agreed at Anchorage, and stated that the, quote, special military operation would continue through military means until such an agreement is reached. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move.
Yeah, and the next segment would be me. Hello, guys. This week I'm back for a whole stream, so I'll now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. We are starting with Germany once again increasing its humanitarian aid for Ukraine. In addition to the around 170 million euros pledged in December 2025, a further 60 million euros have now been made available, which will be provided by the Federal Foreign Office. Among other things, the funds are being channeled into the UN World Food Programme, which supports people in frontline areas, the UN Refugee Agency, which provides emergency power generators for emergency shelters, hard word for a German, sorry, and UNICEF, which will use the German funds to supply around 170,000 people with hot water, and heating systems. In addition, various NGOs are carrying out measures that include donations of cash, clothing, and blankets. On Thursday, the World Health Organization in Ukraine made public that with co-funding of the German government, they have been supplying 5 high-power emergency power generators to hospitals in Kyiv, as well as another one to a hospital in Odessa. And last but not least, on the same day, I reported that the city of Kyiv and the German Society for International Cooperation, or short GITS, have signed an agreement which ensures the delivery of 2 combined heat and power plants to the Ukrainian capital as early as next week. So somewhat from between Monday and Sunday next week, basically, with the German government paying for the donation. And yeah, that's it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Germany to Ukraine. It's good to have you back. Okay, so up next, we're going to talk with Stanimir a little bit about what's going on with the Russian economy. So, Stanimir, I believe this week we start in the Far East, where things are not going great. Is that right?
Yes, if you've seen, there has been a storm that has covered Kamchatka in as much snow in a day as they would get for an entire winter. So they needed help in getting dug out from the mountains of snow that they were buried under. And what's more interesting is something in the nearby Sakhalin region, which was that we had a peculiar case of an outage of heating in an apartment building with people being unable to replace the part because it wasn't in stock in the entire Russian Far East. We're talking about a heat exchanger, which would be easy to make, but it seems that they don't want to go for the trouble, so people are waiting for several days for the part to arrive from Moscow. So this is the level of support people are getting when it comes to heating in Russia. The other interesting thing when it comes to heating this week is Murmansk, which has been without power. Large parts of it have been without power for the last 3 days. And along with it, it's also the city of Severomorsk. For those who know, that's the headquarters of the Russian Black Fleet. Not Black Fleet, but the Russian Northern Fleet. And the reason is that along the lines of, along the power lines, 4 of the poles that actually make up the power lines were actually taken down by the storm. And here you can see them trying to make a temporary pole with wood because they didn't have enough metallic constructions materials to build to repair the existing poles. And right now in Murmansk, because of the outage of heating, you can see that they have field kitchens prepared by the Russian army and the Russian Rosguard, the National Guard in Russia. And you can see here one of the poles that has fallen down. So what's happening is that on the first day, the governor said, we're going to fix everything tonight, announced that everything has been fixed. And then it turned out that nothing had been fixed. And right now in Murmansk, we have supermarkets that are closed, around 20 of them. And in the remaining supermarkets, you have queues and you have supermarkets that are actually out of bread. We have actual pictures of that. Yeah, the supermarkets are packed, at least the ones that are working. In some of them, there is no bread, as you can see on these pictures. And also, what's happening is they're getting food deliveries from the government while they're without heating. They've partially restored some of the heating for some of the town. There's partial power in the town. But for now, I think the earliest they can expect things to recover is for tomorrow in the evening. And I think they're going to have outages for at least half of next week. The other thing is that the reason for the poles falling is that they have a service life of 40 years, after which they have to be inspected every 5 years and see if they should be renewed, they should be replaced. And the first two poles that fell were built in 1966, so way past their service life. They should have probably been replaced by now. The third pole was built in 1982, and the last pole was built in 1988. So it's the only one that's technically within its service life. But when you have ice and cold weather, you get a lot of buildup of ice on the poles, and you also get brittle metal, so you can get breakages if the metal has been worn out by storms for the last 40 or 60 years, as this is the case. And here you can see on this video is the replacement pole they got from the nearby Republic of Karelia. So yeah, I think right now we can say that Kyiv has been hit hard and has had issues with heating, but Russians on their own, for their mismanagement, are having even worse issues in parts of Russia, because this is what 27 years of Putin's rule does to the infrastructure, with underinvestment and tons of corruption. So we can move next to the rest of the news for the week. I'll start with Russia's budget deficit for 2025. We had an announcement earlier this week that it was at 5.65 trillion rubles, according to the Ministry of Finance. It's within the percentage that they projected in September, but I have to say that it's quadrupled in size since the passing of the budget the year before last year. It also shows that when it comes to VAT revenue, they were 900 billion below the mark that they set, which means that if they look at their plans regarding VAT revenue for 2026, they might have to also revise them because things aren't going as well as they would like in the Russian economy. The other big thing that we got is that the Russian oil taxes for January of 2026 will be almost 62% lower than January of 2025. That means that they're going to be getting probably 5 to 8% less in oil and gas revenue, just based off that number for the budget as a whole, as the federal budget, given what part of the budget is made up of the oil and gas revenue. And also we had news that the IMF lowered its projection for Russian growth for the GDP in 2026 to 0.2%, and it lowered the projection of the growth for 2025 from 1% to 0.8%. I think Russian estimations are already at 0.8% without the last few months and adjusting seasonally, so it's probably going to be lower than that. And when it comes to 2026, Russian leading economists are speaking more and more of recession rather than growth. We also had news on the oil and gas front for major acquisitions. For those who don't know, Serbia's main oil company, NIS, it's more than 50% of it is owned by Gazprom and Gazprom Neft, which has led to it being sanctioned and stopped working. So they're now relying on fuel deliveries from Hungary. So the Hungarian company MOL has gone into agreement with Gazprom Neft to purchase their stake in the Serbian oil company. And the deal is expected to be signed on March 31st, 2026. So that's one way of divesting from Russian assets within Serbia via sanctions. We also have the Mexican group, the Mexican company Grupo Castro, which has agreed to purchase Lukoil stake in the Ichalkil and Pokoch offshore oil fields. It will acquire Lukoil subsidiary field with Mexico for around $270 million. And we also paid the $330 million that the company has in debt. I think this is the first big purchase of Lukoil assets outside of Russia since the sanctions, and I'm hoping we see more of those in the coming weeks. And something that I previously mentioned on a previous stream was that we should expect to see a problem with Russian restaurants and Russian catering establishments. And this has happened already. So they're closing en masse because their profitability has dropped from 15% to 3 to 4% in the best case. So a lot of restaurants in Russia are operating at a loss. And this is due to people cutting costs and choosing cheaper options like fast food restaurants. I think out of all catering establishments, only the fast food restaurant segment as a whole is doing well in terms of growing revenue or growing profitability. Everything else is going down the drain largely. Now, when it comes to banking, we had the data for 2025 on the volume of the issued credit cards in Russia. They decreased by 43%, and their combined credit limits decreased by 41%. This is despite an increase in both by 5% in December of 2025. And it's not expected that there will be a big recovery in 2026. So we should expect either a small growth or the level staying at the same level. And when it comes to VTB, they have projections for the Russian cash loan market. They dropped their interest on those loans by 2% on average. So the lowest interest for a cash loan in Russia from VTB now is 23.1%, because they expect this segment to see a 60% growth in 2026 to 5.6 trillion rubles. Again, that doesn't speak well for the finances of Russians, especially in the lowest strata, which usually resort to such loans. So it's another indicator that the Russian banking system might soon have a lot of bad loans on its books, despite the high profits that they're reporting right now. When it comes to metals from the commodities, we had the report for the Chinese imports of aluminum from Russia. In 2025, in terms of the dollar value, they increased by 50% to $5.9 billion. And this is mostly unprocessed aluminum, which accounted to $5.7 billion of this. Russian companies that are actually competing with Chinese companies on the Russian market for such things as aluminum foil usually have issues, because then the Chinese turn back and sell such products at a dumping price and are pricing out Russian companies on their own market. Because of this, the Eurasian Economic Union has actually introduced duties on Chinese aluminum products. So yeah, this is another way where Russia is helping China actually destroy its own market. When it comes to coal, the Russian Ministry of Energy has supported the initiative by the Russian Ministry of Finance to grant the 138 coal mining companies an additional deferral when it comes to paying the mineral extraction tax. I think they will kick this along till the end of 2026, and then they will forgive all this debt by the companies, because I don't see any other way for these companies to make a profit if they have to also pay the mineral extraction tax and the high cost of transportation. For oil and gas, we have Russian LNG exports to China increased by 18.3% in 2025 to 9.8 million tons. However, because China has been aggressive when it comes to pricing negotiations, Russia actually got less money paid for them at $4.98 billion, which is 0.06% lower than in 2024. So in essence, the Chinese price that they're paying for Russian LNG decreased by almost 20% in 1 year. On the construction market, the volume of purchases of elevators in Russia for the replacement of aging elevators by the government in existing buildings rose by 26.6% to 17,600 in 2025. However, that doesn't mean it's all rosy for the Russian regions, because the majority of these purchases are down to two contracts, one for 9,000 by Moscow and one for 4,000 by Moscow regions, which means for the rest of the country, they're really behind the replacement schedule for elevators, and they already extended the service life of elevators by 5 years last year, and I wouldn't advise you to get on an elevator in an old Russian building if you see that it hasn't been replaced, because these things are operating beyond their projected life. We also had information about one of Russia's largest cement producers, Tsemros. It's actually the largest in Russia. It closed down 2 of its plants, one in Belgorod and one in Ulyanovsk, and limited work at the Lipetsk plant. It says that there has been a 9.6% decrease in domestic cement purchases with the trouble in the construction sector, and also that Russian cement companies are actually facing imports at dumping prices by Russia's pals, Iran and Belarus. Again, Belarus is a country that Russia subsidizes through oil exports and cheap gas, and then Belarus usually uses that to make goods that are cheaper than Russia and resell them at a profit inside Russia. In Ulyanovsk, Tsemros already fired around 250 people at its plant, leaving just 14 people operating at the plant. They're just basically keeping the lights on, and the plant isn't really doing anything. And we have that the volume of new office buildings that are going to be commissioned in Moscow in 2026 will decrease by 2.5 to 4% and by 9 to 23% in 2027, depending on the class of office building. And this is due to rising costs, labor shortages, and the decreased demand for office space in Moscow, which has already started by the end of 2025, when a lot of companies were building their own office buildings, and there wasn't that much demand to rent office space as there was before. And also, when it comes to real estate developers, the largest real estate developer, Samolet, when it comes to square meters built, sold parts of its projects in one of Moscow's regions, in one of Moscow's districts. And this is to a Tyumen real estate company, Brusnica, and the deal was valued at 1 billion rubles. Samolet has been selling a lot of the land that it had acquired for real estate development over the last few months, because its profits had gone down and it's barely operating at a profit in 2025. When it comes to interesting data points this week, we have a lot. So we have information that in Russia, in terms of physical sales, lamb sales dropped by 39%, beef sales dropped by 6%, pork sales remained unchanged. They're exporting some pork to China, for example, to make up for that overproduction, and demand for chicken went up by 4%. And the number of sheep and goats in Russia in 2025 actually decreased by 7.4% to 2.6 million. This is mostly consumed in the southern parts of Russia. So for them, this means that their purchasing power has evaporated largely. We also have news that the adoption of the Max messenger, the state-owned messenger and spyware, isn't going well, because 57% of Russia's top 40 Telegram channels switched to Max, and their audience on Telegram is 60 times larger than their audience on Max. They went from 87 million followers in Telegram to 1.4 million in Max, and it shows that Max is being installed and adopted by people just because they have orders from the government. It's not actually used all that much. We also had the data for the sales of Russian laptops in 2025. They decreased heavily from 3.9 million to 2.9 million. And in terms of ruble value, from between 169 to 183 billion to from 212 to 242 billion to 169 to 183 billion. The average price of the laptops purchased also dropped by 8% to 58,000 rubles. We also had, because of the butter issue last year, talks between Russia and Belarus, because the Russian market is being pressured by producers from Belarus who have a market share of 23%, which is drastic for a country that's 20 times smaller than Russia on average. And we also had Russian major dairy producers decrease their price of dairy products between 5 and 15%, citing cheaper raw materials, but also a decrease in demand. For butter prices, they dropped by 10% because there was a 9.6 decrease in consumption in 2025. And we also have other retail data showing that for the first 9 months of 2025, butter sales at retail dropped by 12%. And the price of butter, which peaked being 8.7% higher in October than at the start of the year, dropped to just being 1.9% higher in December at the end of 2025. We also saw that Russian beer production in 2025 decreased by 1%, and producers are linking this to the rising cost of production and the duties on beer. For beer with an alcohol volume of less than 8.6%, prices rose duties rose 2 times by 3 rubles, from 27 rubles per liter to 43 rubles per liter by the end of 2025. When it comes to Chinese cars, they saw a decline in the number of dealerships they had. In 2025, 643 dealerships closed down in Russia, which is 40% higher than in 2024. We're talking just dealerships for Chinese cars. Only 459 opened during the same time in Russia, which is less than 1/3 of the number that opened in 2024. And the number of dealerships for Chinese brands in Russia decreased by 7%, and their market share dropped from 67 to 64%. On the Russian car market as a whole, for new cars and LCVs in monetary terms, the sales decreased by 7.8% to 14.8 trillion rubles. This is the first decrease since 2015. For the new cars, I mean, this was the combined total for the new car market and the used car market. For the new cars, the segment dropped by 18.4%, and for the used cars, it dropped by 1.4%. So this is something they haven't seen, not just since the start of the full-scale invasion, but this is something they haven't seen in a decade, since 2015. And the final interesting data point that I have this week is that the auto parts factory DAS, which provides Avtovaz with parts for its Lada cars, switched to not a 4-day work week, but a 3-day work week, which means they have less than 60% of the demand they used to have previously. Lada hasn't decreased that much its production, but in 2025 it's it's not decreased its production times that much, but in 2025 it decreased its production volume by 40% to around 300,000 cars in total. When it comes to inflation and debt, first we have the inflation. So from the period of the 14th to the 19th of January, inflation came in at a almost record high of 0.45%, which is a lot for 7 days. And thus far, for the first 19 days of January, the total inflation is 1.72% versus just 0.88% in 2025. So inflation is double what it was in 2025. And it's a lot higher also than in the other previous years. We have to go way back to see inflation this high for the start of the year. We might also expect, because of this and the upcoming meeting of the Russian Central Bank, for them to not lower the interest rate, and they might even raise it because inflation is running out of control, especially if you're thinking that you just have a target of 4% to 5% inflation for the entire year. For some things like cucumbers, prices have gone up 40% since the start of the year. So for Russians buying groceries, this is a big problem. When it comes to debt, they had 2 auctions again. In the first one, they sold almost 15 billion rubles at the yield of 14.64%. And in the second auction, they sold almost 51 billion rubles at the yield of 14.71%. And I think this is it for me for this week.
Thank you, Stanimir. So yeah, as always, we'll stay tuned next week and each week for Stanimir's updates on the Russian economy. Now we move to the seas. So yeah, we're going to talk to our guest, Erlend. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, so we have a guest back that hasn't been on the stream for a very long time. I'm not sure if you've been on the stream or if you've only been in Twitter Spaces with us, Exit, but welcome back.
Thank you. I was on the stream a while ago. It was, yeah, long time. I'm glad. Thank you.
So yeah, over the last few years, obviously we watched the Ukrainian shipping adapt and corridors open and narrow, and shadow tankers multiply. Pressure has increased on both sides lately, and there is enormous amount of events that has happened both in the Black Sea, but also in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic. And I wanted to ask Exit if she could please help us understand what's actually going on with the maritime affairs that are connected with Ukraine and Russia. So I'm very happy to have Exit back. For those who didn't know Exit has been tracking also Ukrainian grain shipping and I guess also commercial shipping in general through the Ukraine corridor tracking for a very long time. And she's also looking into naval affairs. So go follow Exit266 on Twitter or Blue Sky if you are interested in those kind of topics. It's not an expertise that we have in Tochnyi, so we're very happy to have you here.
I think it's not an expertise that a lot of people seem to have. That's actually kind of a problem. It's hard to throw ideas around with people who understand what you're talking about, but it is what it is. Yeah, so we actually we tracked grain shipments in and out of Ukraine and commercial shipping generally from the start of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which was in July of 2022 to December 1st of 2025 last year. Because just nobody else was really doing it. The data that was out there was for a while by the UN through the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and it was great to have them doing that. They were great to work with. But then when it transitioned to Russia essentially not prolonging the Black Sea Grain Initiative and Ukraine opening up their own corridor and kind of taking a chance to see if they could make it work without anybody else backing them, because nobody else would back them, there was just nobody really tracking whether or not that was working, how comfortable commercial ships felt with that actually happening. And it turned out felt so comfortable and they used so well that kind of by even the middle of 2024, we were sitting around going, are we still providing value by actually tracking this information? And by the middle of 2025, kind of by March of 2025, we had decided that we really weren't providing value anymore. Ukraine was doing such an amazing job at keeping ships safe, at making sure that commercial shipping felt like they could come in and out of Ukraine, that they could be a dependable, reliable source of imports and exports. It's not just traffic. It's not just there's a big fourth there. And it really was creating kind of the backbone of Ukraine's economy. And so by the middle of 2025, we decided that we were going to stop tracking incoming ships, and we finished up the very last of our outgoing ships we declared as delivered on December 1st of 2025. I think you have a slideshow that you can put up, Erlend. But it has changed a lot since then. And I'm going to run through kind of a really, really quick timeline of all of these things. And I'm just going to hit some of the highlights because there's just way too much to even hit it all. Ironically, to us, always said, okay, well, if we stop tracking, what's going to happen? Like, is it going to continue on like this, or is something going to suddenly change and we're going to say, oh man, I wish we'd continued tracking? And I think we're at the, oh man, I kind of wish we had continued tracking stage. but also I don't know that that project still has the same value that it did. We definitely still keep an eye on things daily, but it's not at the same degree that it was before. So we're actually going to start all the way back in August of 2015, or 2025, sorry, August 15th of 2025. Next slide. You actually need to go to the CASI where a lot of this stuff kind of really to escalate in ways that we hadn't seen before. So in August, we saw an attack on a ship called the Port Olia 5 in the Caspian. That's a ship that had been tracking back and forth between Iranian ports and Russian ports, almost certainly delivering all sorts of munitions and just different military supplies that were going back and forth between the two countries. It has long been tracked by a number of people, had a big history, and Ukraine was able to reach out and touch her. Kind of a different we had seen she sank in some interesting waters. They were able to raise her up, but definitely a notable thing that we saw happen there. From there, we saw some attacks in Primorsk, which nobody's ever actually claimed a whole bunch of. There's actually like a lot claimed, but have Shadow Fleet tankers somehow being interdicted by somebody along the way, and we can all guess kind of what's going on there. Next,
but Exit, the Caspian Sea is very far from Ukraine. Do you have any indication of how Ukraine has managed to perform these operations?
I would say
if it's not important, we don't need to comment on it. But it's obviously is. I just wanted to kind of put a light on it because this is probably an area where the Russians assumed that they wouldn't be.
Yeah, the Russians definitely assume that they're very safe over there. Yeah. We don't know specifically how that particular attack happened. We have seen UAVs, some of the long-range drones, headed from Ukraine over to some of the Russian naval bases over there, and there have been attacks with long-range drones. Specifically how this attack happened, I would say we don't have evidence to be certain how that happened. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's enough. But anyways, like it's definitely a place where the Russians felt that they could do more or less what they wanted.
Yeah, like trade back and forth between Iran, full-scale invasion, it's been consistent. It really hasn't, nobody's tried to stop it. This is like a tiny, quote unquote, body of water where everybody who operates in there felt that they were safe, and they have continued to feel safe. And we'll see as we go on that they're very much not safe, and they have some big issues in there. The next really notable thing that I think is really notable, and a lot of people kind of have ignored it along the way, this attack in Romania, well, sorry, it's not in Romania. The attack was on the Ukrainian port of Ismail, which is directly from Romania. Directly attacked this LNG ship with ahead, as far as we know, a Duran, sorry. And they intentionally set it on fire. It was a huge fire that made Romania basically move out a whole bunch of people in the area, evacuate a whole bunch of people in order to keep them safe. Romania's had all sorts of like drones landing in their areas, all sorts of things that they've had to deal with. They've been responding to a degree. They do technically have the ability now to fire on drones that are entering their airspace. So far, we don't know of any occasions where they actually have. But this was the first time it actually made them evacuate people. Notably, Ukraine didn't evacuate anybody for this particular strike. But it's a big deal. And I mean, Ukraine has been importing LNG because it's one of the few ways that they can kind of backstop their power generation issues. Russia directly targeting these vessels is a big deal because it essentially cuts off Ukraine's backstop to their power generation. And it was the first step in really starting to target power generation in Ukraine that was going to have pretty lasting effects if it didn't stop pretty quickly. If they continue targeting these vessels, eventually those vessels are going to stop going to Ukraine, and then all of a sudden you have an issue getting gas back into Ukraine, and that's going to really be an issue long term. Then we saw the Mersin, which nobody's actually claimed that attack one way or another either. Obviously, that was down in Africa. Next slide. Okay, so then we saw the Kairos and the Virat get hit in the Black Sea. This is fundamentally what I got wrong. But in 2025 and like generally, I did not think that we would see Ukraine attacking Russian tankers in the Black Sea. It's one thing to attack tankers outside the Black Sea because it's harder for Russia to actually secure those ships. We had seen Ukraine attacking military-related ships. We'd seen them attacking actual Russian Navy ships. We had not seen them actually go after what most people would classify as commercial ships. Yes, they are moving Russian crude, probably not in legal ways. That's why it's a shadow fleet. But we hadn't seen Ukraine actually attacking commercial shipping in and out of Russia. And predictably, we went from these commercial ships being attacked to then see that in the next couple of weeks, we started to see Ukrainian ships being attacked. So we have in the bottom on the left-hand side would be the Viva. She was outbound from a Ukrainian port. And then we also the next day had the Sank T, which is a ferry ship. It was attacked directly in Chernомorsk. There's video you can find anywhere of Duran actually heading straight for the ship and hitting the very bow of the ship, but up, importantly, up on the actual structure. And that's probably what caused such a massive fire and caused that to be a really big deal. So like essentially we went from one day having fairly steady commercial traffic in and out of Ukrainian and Russian ports in the Black Sea to within a week, both sides intentionally targeting ships headed to any of their commercial ports, which was a huge change. From there, we've gone the Caspian. Next slide. We're starting to see oil platforms and also Astrakhan gas plant is getting attacked over there. There's just a whole bunch of action in that whole Caspian area. It is not quiet. It is not safe. Anybody in Russia that thinks that it is safe is definitely rid of that idea very quickly now. And I mean, to a degree, that's probably very useful to stop shipments back and forth between Iran. I would argue that what's happening in Iran right now might actually be even more useful to that. So, but that wasn't a predictable thing. Ukraine, if they wanted to be able to stop that traffic, was going to have to stop. And then next slide, the Quindel, I have no idea how you say that ship name, but anyways, it's a great name. It's a Russian shadow fleet ship. It was sailing through the Mediterranean and had some UAVs attack the top of the ship. There's some reports that maybe there was somebody who was actually hit in those attacks. We don't actually know that for sure. We do know that the ship has some really interesting people on board that ship. There's a whole bunch of well-documented and well-recorded investigations into that. Dossier Center, which is a Russian language publication, they've done some excellent work on that. And if you want to go read about it, I absolutely would encourage you to check theirs out.
But why specifically do you think that there were possibly GRU operators on that ship?
I think there's two theories, and we don't know which one is which. Number one, we know that there are GRU on lots of ships. That's not new, especially for shadow fleet tankers, and especially for just Russian commercial ships transiting through areas where Russia would like to have more information. That is not new. That has continued to have people on a ship, and if your ship ever gets stopped or never gets attacked, those people can sail from port to port, and it's not totally hard to make them unknown or make them seem like they're part of the crew or they're just along for the ride or whatever. That's not impossible to do. It's relatively easy. Why they were specifically on this ship, I won't claim to know the answer to that, but it's either a protection thing or it's because they were gathering information. We've seen both of those be the answer. We are definitely seeing, as you'll see a little bit later on, we're seeing a lot more Russian protection measures for shadow fleet tankers as they're transiting basically anywhere.
Yeah, I guess it's safe to say or assume that the Russians are asserting much more risk connected with the transition of these ships in the shadow fleet.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to them. They need the money, they need the cash flow. This is really important to them to actually have these ships continue sailing. And if you have ship owners or ship crews who are saying, well, I don't know if I want to keep doing this work because it's starting to become dangerous, or I don't want to get arrested by the US or anybody else, I'm going to start seeing more protection levels for these ships. But I think more importantly, the gray zone activities that we've seen all the way through Europe, and Russia generally making efforts to collect data about shipping or undersea cables or any number of things that they're trying to collect data. Commercial shipping is a really easy way to put sensors or people or equipment into areas that you might have a harder time doing otherwise. And it's a great avenue for that. And this isn't a new, it's just that we're acting more evident in the public.
Yeah.
Then we saw another escalation. We saw Rubicon directly posting 3 of 4 strikes in 2 days of ships that were actually either waiting to go into Ukrainian ports or they had entered Ukrainian ports, were moored and were loading or unloading their cargo, and they were directly attacked by what we assume are Rubicon drones. These change a little bit because it seems like they're using new drones. They're definitely attacking that are actually in port and in places in ports where we'd kind of actions. So I would say it's fairly simple to say that they are trying to intimidate ships. They're trying to intimidate crews into believing that these ports are too dangerous to continue working out of, and you should probably stop now, which fundamentally, that's how you're going to get shipping to stop going into Ukraine and out of Ukraine, is just by convincing people that they shouldn't sail there anymore, that it's just too dangerous. That also has the side benefit of increasing insurance prices, and you really can't sail into any of these places without insurance. So if it just costs you more and nobody wants to do it, that's a problem.
Yeah. And we also discussed this exit when it happened, and to me it seems like they're using specific warheads that they've not necessarily used against other ships in the past. You can clearly see the actually on some of these images as well that there are fragmentation warheads that have exploded on or next to these ships, which is a little bit strange if you want to actually sink the ship. So my assumption, at least, is that they don't want to sink the ships, but they want to maybe kill some crew or injure crew, and that way maybe that's a sign towards that what you just mentioned, that their intimidation is the goal.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, like, it's not actually easy to sink commercial ships. It's easier to sink some of these ships because generally the ships that sail in and out of the Black Sea and sanctioned tanker ships are older, and so they just generally have more issues, maintenance issues. But definitely, to your point, the munitions they're using, they're not going to sink a ship with something like that. You'd have to hit them way too many times to count. That's not what they're trying to do here. They are absolutely trying to intimidate the people, and they are killing sailors and others who are on these ships, or crew members, or people on the port side, partially because they're people who are on ships sailing into port aren't necessarily getting off the ships, and so they're not getting to bomb shelters. There's way more bomb shelters than there used to be at the start of 2025. So your port workers are a little bit safer than they used to be, but yeah, it's a huge risk. And it's not like this is the only place that sailors deal with risk. Obviously, we can look at numerous places across the globe where risk and sailing into war zones is pretty normal for most sailors. But they're trying to increase the risk here so much that it's just not viable anymore. So obviously, in the midst of all this, there's a whole thing happening on the other side of the Atlantic with Venezuela. And I should say that I think that the main reason acting on, despite all these sanctions and despite all of the work that the EU and others have been doing to label these ships, they haven't actually stopped them, which, like, you are not serious about stopping shadow fleet tankers unless you're stopping them. The US got serious about shadow fleet tankers going in and out of Venezuela, and they stopped them. Europe just wasn't being serious about it. The good part about what happened in Venezuela and that entire chase across the Atlantic with Bella 1 is that this has made it more appetizing for European countries to actually go out there and do something. And we've seen Germany kind of tell somebody they weren't allowed to transit through their waters. We've seen the UK escort somebody out of their waters, and we've now seen France escort people, and they've actually stopped and boarded a ship and arrested it, essentially. This is a big step. Like, it's great that they're doing it. They're also 2 years late, but cool. I'm glad you're actually taking this seriously. There's more ships that are out there that they could have acted on in that same amount of time. So, like, cheer and be excited about it, but don't get too down. It's not like this is a blanket policy. They are choosing very specific ships to actually act on. And we're still seeing other ships down in the Med that are having, essentially, they're saying they're, in the last 2 days, we've had 2 ships that have said, hey, we're not under control, and they've claimed that they're having some kind of issue. One of them has been since escorted by 4 tugs. We don't actually know what's going on either of those 2 ships, but there's something to keep an eye on. You'll see that I put screenshots from Michelle and Windward there. They are giving us some really great details, and they're really tracking that closely. I would encourage them to follow. But it's great that Europe is actually starting to act and take things seriously. We need them to do this consistently, because the shadow fleet is huge. It's not a little problem. Sanctioning them isn't having the effect that we need it to have, and they need to effectively stop all of that transit. And you don't have to board every ship to do that, but you do have to communicate with people that, hey, we're going to take things seriously, and you need to board enough ships that they believe that you are taking things seriously, like the very start of that, but we're not at end by any means.
So you said earlier that they're targeting or stopping specific ships. Do you have any explanation to what those specific ships are either carrying, which flag they're under? What are the indications that you see for why they might be attacking these ships, or attacking, boarding and stopping these ships? Yeah.
Europe is not attacking these ships. So I went and asked Michelle for some of her data, and asked her for some talking points, because I honestly haven't followed the Russian shadow fleet all that closely until quite recently, mostly because tracking just general commercial shipping out of Ukraine is a giant, talking about a job that took us no less than 8 hours per day with myself and 2 other volunteers, just to be able to do like the basic tracking for 1,200 days that we were doing it. That was a huge job. We did not have more time to track shadow fleet. But when we're talking about the shadow fleet, essentially 76% Windward's dark fleet crude tankers are actually sanctioned. So Windward, obviously they track ships daily. Of the dark fleet ships that they've kind of labeled, 76% of those are actually sanctioned. 20% of internationally trading tanker fleet ships are trading outside of the rules-based order. So outside of like all of the things that we've said a ship needs to be able to do in order to sail the seas and trade commercially. On average, about 20 years of age. So they're pretty old ships. And we're also going to see very shortly, I think it was yesterday or today, the EU is supposed to actually put a ban on petroleum refined products from Russian crude. So that should, again, have another change in how Russian crude gets traded. We'll have to watch for exactly what changes that it makes, but it will have a change. The sanction trade sanctions are great in that they lower the utilization, so Russia can't continue using those ships in the same way that they were. It makes them create new routes for shipping because they have to avoid certain ports, or they can only go into other ports in order to resupply, things like that. It just basically increased the cost. Your end user is only going to pay a certain price, and they're going to pay even less if they know that they're going to get sanctioned as well. It makes you mix oil with more illegal oil. It makes you have to buy new rounds of ships on a consistent basis, all of these things. But ultimately, what's happening here is that you have sanctioned, flagless, stateless ships that are falsely claiming to fly the flags of state registries. So lots of states in the country, especially the legal ones and such. Inspected, you have to say that it's like a safe ship. You have to follow all these laws, essentially saying that you're not going to traffic in sanctioned goods, that you're going to have insurance. There's a whole list of things that you're going to follow. And so, sorry, I'm just reading my notes one quick sec. The ships that are actually boarding are under one clause or Article 1 allows you as an authority a stateless vessel. So that means that if I have a ship and I say it flies under the flag of Gambia, but Gambia doesn't actually have a ship registry right now, they have actually completely canceled all their ship registry, and because they were hiring that out to a separate company, it turns out it was a Russian company, and oddly, people weren't actually following all the laws that they're supposed to follow. You'll be shocked to find that out. So Gambian flag ships are essentially stateless ships right now. They don't actually have a registration with any country. And that means that an authority can come alongside, they can board that ship. And if it's sanctioned, they can ship based on what they find on the ship and what the legal paperwork to say that they're a registered ship and are allowed to sail the seas, because obviously their flag isn't legal. And so that makes them legally capable of boarding these ships. That is what the US is using. That's what France and the UK have been using. Basically, anybody that you're seeing boarding ships and arresting them, that's what they're doing. They're taking stateless ships. Now, the problem then becomes Russia is not a bunch of idiots. They have a state registry. Their state registry is more interesting because it's actually, you have to be a Russian-owned ship in order to register in their state registry. But as soon as they register in that state registry, they become not a stateless ship, and it's harder to legally stop those ships. And so you're seeing all of these ships transfer over into, not all of them, but a good percentage of them transferring over into the Russian state registry. And that will make it harder for anybody to stop those ships because legally they won't have the same mechanism that we've seen them use so far. And part of what's so frustrating to people who follow shipping really closely is that lots of us have been screaming from the rooftops for years and years now, hey, there's all these ships flying around that are going through your waters. They don't have legal registrations. Why are you allowing them to sail through your waters? And people are ignoring that and allowing them to sail through. Turkey is like the biggest offender in this. And then these ships are having either environmental issues or they're breaking down, washing up on the shore, things like that. And if you don't have a registration, you also can't have insurance, which means that anytime any of those ships break down in your waters, they're just there and nobody's ever going to pay for it. And you're just screwed. You're dealing with a ship full of oil, like on the side of your coast, and you're hooped. There's nothing you can do about it. Nobody's ever going to pay for that damage. You have to clean it up. And you're essentially responsible because you allowed that ship into your waters. That's what's happening here. People could have acted on these ships a long time ago when they started sanctioning them. They chose not to. They didn't take it seriously. That's why we are where we are. That's why Ukraine acted and started using their ability to quote unquote sanction these ships.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is important because understanding why they actually feel safe or within their powers to do something is kind of a mystery to most people, I think. We have touched upon this ship registry here and also the law of the seas a little bit in past streams. Joseph did a pretty good job on the Great Ship Hunt, or was it what it was called? Yeah, the Bella 1 case. So we actually did follow that case here, but thank you so much for explaining the reasons for why the specific ships are being stopped.
Yeah. Maybe next slide, and I'll just give a few details about Ukraine really quick. So a few things we can talk about with Ukraine. It is not easy right now. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the big pie chart that's actually kind of in the left corner of that bigger piece is the blue part is how much of Ukraine's grain leaves the country out of the Odessa area ports. It's like most of it, almost all of it goes out of the Odessa area ports. If they get shut down, it's really bad. There's just no way to sugarcoat that. It's really stinking bad. We've also had just in the last year, or sorry, in the last couple of days, we've had the Ukrainian Port Authority come out and say that they've released a whole bunch of different statistics, basically celebrating the fact that since September 2023, so when they started Ukrcore, they have transported 100 million tons of grain out of the Odessa area ports. In 2025 alone, 73.2 million tons of cargo have transported through the maritime corridor. So that is the corridor from through Ukrainian waters, essentially. Of that, just over half, 38 million tons, are grain. So the 38 million tons are grain is great. What is actually even more notable is that almost half of it isn't grain. And that's really great because it means that for 2025, Ukraine's economy was actually starting to thrive through all of that. And everybody was getting to make use of the ports in a really productive way. Now, obviously, Russia's kind of pissed off right now. They're working really hard to essentially collapse Ukraine's economy. They are going to try and do that by reducing power, by reducing availability of logistics, so especially trains, which power and trains are connected because most of Ukrainian trains run on power. They're trying to reduce the shipping confidence, so what we were talking about with fragmentary warheads, and they're trying to increase insurance rates, because if you increase insurance rates, at some point it just isn't economical to continue using shipping. A side note to all that is that they're also attacking a lot of the ways that Ukraine could export through EU countries on their borders. They've tried to shut down those logistics as well. And the power issues just generally are going to cause a whole bunch of issues with that. The most important thing that we can watch now, and we've also had, I should note, DTEC come out this week, their CEO, and basically say that Ukraine is getting really, really close to having a humanitarian disaster because of the power issues. And fundamentally, a port cannot operate with power issues. It just doesn't work that way. You have huge cranes, you have so many pieces of a port that absolutely need power. There's just no way you can power. But of course, Russia continues to target backup power as well. There's only so many things you can do. And you can see there in the top right of that slide, Ukrainitsa has actually come out and said that in the first 13 days of January, their cargo flow to the ports is down year over year 11%. That said, in the first 15 days of January, Ukrainian ports have said that their ability to export, or the number of ships, are actually up 9% over that time. You might ask why, and I would tell you that's because there's often kind of a lull through the holiday period, and then you see a big glut of ships come in right at the beginning of January, and it's likely that at least a portion of that 9% increase is because big glut of ships, and they all would have left fairly quickly, right? And that's what you're actually seeing. I think there's one more slide, one or two.
Yeah, there's two more.
Yeah. Okay. War insurance, it's absolutely going up. This is a big problem. It's increasing the cost of every ship that goes in and out of that those ports. They're also starting to reevaluate the war insurance percentage and whether they'll even continue to cover ships every 24 hours. That was not the case until the last of the month. So that's an issue. Yeah, and Ukraine did some fantastic and amazing things in 2025. It's not like the ports weren't getting attacked. When they noted that they were shut down for more than 1 month of total time for air raids, if you consider that and you can still consider that their percentages of export and import were up so much higher than even 2024, that's like mind-blowing. Like what they have actually done is just fantastic on a level that most people just can't grasp. These are people who are working so hard to overcome so many challenges, and they are being effective in that. And that's just friggin' cool. That should be really celebrated. But also, 1 month of downtime for air raids over a full year is a lot. And that number is going to increase as we go through 2020 and not by a little bit. I would say just the things I'm watching for, these 2025 are great. We are going to start seeing a drop off in 2026. If we don't see numbers start to drop in January, which I expect that they will for the end of January, they will definitely drop in the next couple months unless things start to slow down. We've seen some changes in the Ukrainian government that are really leading me to believe that they're taking this seriously and they're actually working well with their partners to try and fix these things. They brought in some new advisors and such, have been very this in the past, and I think will be helpful in the future. If those advisors can actually fix the energy situation, then that could allow us to actually continue exporting and importing in ways that are useful. If Russia hits or sinks a ship, or like hits a ship in a consistent basis, so they hit more than like 2 ships per day, or they hit ships kind of daily for an extended period of time, or they actually sink a ship, that's going to be an issue. Also watching the alternative modes of export, how the flows actually change to those different areas, whether or not they actually can even use those modes of export, because I mean, their logistics ability with are not good for anybody, for anything. And obviously they're prioritizing it for either humanitarian assistance or military assistance. And that doesn't leave a lot left for commercial right now. And that if you can't get your stuff out, then you have a larger problem. And the larger problem is that eventually you're not going to have the same taxable income coming into the government if you just can't export anything and your companies can't run. And we're already seeing that there are a number of agricultural companies in Ukraine that are doing really, really well and actually thriving through 2025. But that's not universally the story. And if you look at bankruptcies, commercial bankruptcies across Ukraine for 2025, agriculture is the highest percentage of those bankruptcies. And if Ukrainian agriculture just falls apart generally, that's not good for the country in full. Like it has some serious tax implications and some income implications for the government. So we need to watch how that works. What else?
Yeah, this is the last slide, but I guess that's where we start to sum up and maybe open the panel a little bit more for questions also from the audience and from the panel. First, I want to ask you, or thank you so much for the timeline, Exit. This has been very interesting to listen to, and I hope the audience feel the same way and have good questions. So my question for you is, what do you think Ukraine could do to avoid further escalation, where the Russians will feel comfortable hitting these commercial ships without obvious consequences that may cause the Russians to be more cautious about this? Because it seems like we're entered into territory which is kind of murky for Ukraine, where yes, they've obviously upped the ante, and the focus on the shadow fleet is much more. It's obviously creating more issues for Russia, but at the same time, it's a massive risk that Ukraine may lose a lot of commercial shipping. And so, yeah, what do you think Ukraine should do?
So number one, the people that you're seeing on the screen right now, every single one of them helps me daily stay on top of these things. I can't do all of this by myself, especially with some of the other projects that I work on kind of in the background. Every single one of them does an excellent job of following all of the different pieces of this story. And you should follow every single one of these people. They are fantastic, and I can't give them enough props. What questions that you asked me in the lead up to this was the key misconception about the Black Sea. And I think people see what has happened to the Russian Navy, and they believe that Russia is not capable of stopping shipping or Ukraine's economy by stopping shipping. And that's just not true. Russia could do that tomorrow if they wanted to. They haven't. And it wouldn't necessarily be easy, but it is absolutely possible. Which should tell you that the fact that they have it for a long period of time that does have some strength and is able to put pressure enough on Russia to create some fear and some negotiating strength. And that's very good. But it should also tell you that probably there's been an unwritten agreement that, like, hey, your ports are important, our ports are important. Let's all say we're going to agree to disagree. Everybody's kind of quote unquote happy about it. I don't know how you get back to that, honestly. I have thought a lot about that in the last little while. First of all, I'm not sure that either side wants to get back to that. I think that may not be the case. And I would caution anybody who thinks that that is how they want to move forward. Ukraine needs some points of power in negotiations. And part of the ways that they do that is by flow into cash flow that causes friction and tension in Russia, and that is useful for Ukraine. What that equation looks like and how much risk they're willing to take on, I said at the start of this, and I still believe that's the number one thing I got wrong, and I'm not sure that I now understand how anybody will walk that back, or if they want to walk that back. So I would say I really do not know the answer to that. And I don't know that anybody's looking for the answer to that.
Yeah, thank you. And then, so we don't know what Ukraine could do. And I'm also an open question mark for that. But what can Europe do? and also our partners on the other side of the Atlantic, in order to change the situation with the Shadow Fleet, and also that could do something that could protect the commercial access to the Black Sea for Ukraine.
Yeah. So there's two things that are going to be useful. Either somebody's going to negotiate some sort of a written or unwritten ceasefire in the Black Sea. Other groups, like Europe, need to create enough pressure that shipping becomes exponentially dangerous or costly for Russia, so that the pressure that Ukraine is trying to create is amplified by their actions. And that does mean stopping Shadow Fleet tankers, stopping stateless tankers, enforcing sanctions, working with the people who service ships to make sure that they're not working with these sanctioned ships. Sanction, like, there is these different groups of people who have ships, and when you look at the whole of all of the sanctioned ships, not everybody sanctions every ship, and that's just, or every company. That's just silly. We all know who these ships are. You can go to any of the ship tracking companies and literally pay them some money, and they will tell you who all the ship tracking or Shadow Fleet ships are. It is not hard to find this information. Governments should easily be able to say, hey, this is the information I purchased today. It tells me that these are the ships that need to be sanctioned, and it gives me all of the data information that I need to do that. And here's actual sanctions, and now somebody go out and enforce them. There was a video I watched earlier this week that said that ship location data, information about shipping generally, is something that only certain allies can do. And I'm here to tell you that is absolutely not true. And this data is out there. People are not making the effort to go out there and work collaboratively to have a response. And they're just scared to do it. And they seem to maybe be getting over the scared part. Now they actually need to engage the people who do this on a daily basis and say, okay, how do we do a great job of this? And go do it, instead of just giving it, which they've been doing for too freaking long.
I wish my prime minister would take a chat with you, Exit, because we have some serious issues in Norway with this. We are, we have an enormously long coastline where a lot of Shadow Fleet ships and also other Russian nefarious business is being conducted at sea. So please have a pep talk with my prime minister, and maybe also the Swedish prime minister.
Sure. I'm all on board for that. But like, I mean, I want to be careful in saying, like, it's really easy for me to say all those things. And part of the reason that these people don't do that is because if you do that, then you start to see things like Russia is actively taking Russian Navy ships to escort Russian tankers through NATO waters. You are going to escalate things, and it's going to cost you some money. It's not going to be fun. And trade generally will be problematic for a lot of those countries. Like, there's a reason that they're not acting. I get that. We're just kind of past the place where that equation is still reasonable. And we've been past it for a while, and people just don't want to actually say, oh crap, we're actually past that equation being reasonable. And I get it, that's scary. And it's not fun when you have elections coming up and all of these other things, because you're going to piss off a lot of people. But it's going to piss off a lot of people, and it's going to cost a lot of people's lives. And you're past the point where you can continue with that alternative.
Yeah, well, the Rubicon has been crossed, I guess, a long time ago, and I just want to say, yes, it costs money, resources, and you risk maybe some escalation towards your own country. But the alternative is that you let Russia continue with these illegal ships, and also we know that those ships are carrying oil products that Russia is earning a lot of money on, which is fueling their war, which is much more negative for us. I don't know if the net sum is necessarily positive if we just sit back.
Yeah, I would more importantly to Europe, it's fueling the war in Ukraine, but that's also fueling all of the gray zone actions that we're seeing. And that's a huge concern for Europe. And Europe knows that. And we're seeing people like acting towards that. Well, if Russia doesn't have money to pay all these groups to do these gray zone actions, you're going to see a drop off of that. So like this isn't just helping Ukraine. It isn't just fixing the Ukraine problem. It's fixing a lot of your problems. You just have to realize that that's part of the equation.
Yeah. And also we have a bunch of different professionals in the Coast Guard, in the Navy, and other departments of the military, and also civilian policing forces that are trained on inspecting and seizing ships that are doing illegal stuff at sea. So they are probably happy to be able to perform what they're trained for. I'm sure they wouldn't be sad about being able to seize some Russian Shadow Fleet ships.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, we actually have a few questions from chat, and please, I'm sure also some of the people in the panel have some good comments. Looking at you, Stanimir and Joseph, but I'll start with just my profile name that came with the question. So, what percentage of Russian Shadow Fleet capacity has been put out of service through strikes or by seizing them? This is a very specific question. Not sure if you have that readily available, Exit, but if you do, then that would be interesting.
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head. I feel like as I was reading through some of the information that Michelle and some others gave me, that the Shadow Fleet number is somewhere around 1,200. And I mean, we're talking like what, 20 ships, maybe 30 ships max. So like your percentage is not very high. But like, frankly, you don't need a super high percentage in order to make other people decide that it's just too expensive to continue that work. We saw that the ship that sunk down, Merzen, the owner of that ship, who, to be, there's no evidence that they were actually, that ship was not sanctioned. There's no evidence that there was anything wrong with that ship. And there's no evidence that they were specifically transporting sanctioned Russian oil or Russian oil. That most of what they were doing was actually above board. But that company then said, hey, even just the idea that we might be doing those things and that we might get attacked because we're working with Russia is too expensive for us to continue doing work with Russia. And so they are no longer in that service at all. So you don't need to hit like a lot of ships. You don't need to interdict a whole bunch of ships with your Navy. You need to hit or interdict enough of them that you cause change, and that number is smaller than you think it is.
Yeah, thank you. And then there is a topic that you kind of touched on from Black Bread. Are the attacks having broader measurable effects on both sides increased charter and insurance costs, longer routes, etc.
Yeah, insurance costs have they're more than doubled. I think in some cases, depending on what your ship is, especially going to some of the Russian Black Sea ports now, you're at like 1.5%, and on a full size Suezmax tanker, that's $1 million for just the insurance. You're actually in Russian waters, and actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know that for sure. They might have to carry war risk insurance longer because these attacks aren't necessarily happening in the Black Sea, or they're not necessarily happening when you're in Russian waters. For the most part, the ships that are going in and out of Ukraine on the other side, they only have to carry the war risk insurance when they're actually in Ukrainian waters. And so that percentage or that piece of payment doesn't extend outside, and it's only for a specific number of, whereas are probably have insurance, so this may or may not even like be an issue for them. But second, if they are actually transporting legal crude or oil products, their costs have definitely increased by a lot, and it may be for longer.
Yeah. No, this is a comment, not a question. I think that was all the questions we had for you, Exit.
I think I have a question from the panel.
Great.
Awesome.
Can we talk about the Caspian Pipeline Consortium and what happened with the oil it was shipping between 2024 and 2025? Because we had something unusual happen the last month with Caspian Pipeline Consortium ships being targeted by Ukraine.
Yeah, and so you track the consortium more than I do. If you're asking why those, it's actually probably the last slide, Erlend. It's the 4 ships that got hit. No, give me 1 second, I'll figure it out. You track that consortium closer than I do generally, so you probably have more information on that, but the specific why are those ships in the Black Sea being targeted around that terminal? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, it's more that it caught me by surprise that I found out that 1/3 of the oil being shipped by the Caspian Pipeline Consortium in 2025 was actually Russian oil, when I expected it to be something around 8 to 10%, which makes attacking tankers that are going to the Caspian Pipeline Consortium relatively a poor idea, because the buyers of Kazakh oil are places like Germany, Bulgaria, Italy. So it caught me by surprise that they had shifted so much of their oil production through that pipeline in a way to avoid Ukrainian attacks, because Ukraine might be worried that the oil that's being loaded on isn't actually Russian, it's Kazakh, and then that Kazakh oil is not under sanctions, or it's mixed, and that Kazakh oil is going to, let's say, Germany, for example, or the Bulgarian refinery in Burgas.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, like, Russian oil gets mixed everywhere, and then it becomes legal oil from a different place, essentially. That's not just happening with Kazakh oil. You have seen in, I think November it was, Ukraine, some new sanctions on a refinery in Romania, in Constanta, that was mixing Russian oil and then shipping it out as different oil. This is like not new. It happens everywhere, and it's part of how they get around sanctions. It's harder to stop that. If you can prove it, you will still see that there will be sanctions on those particular refineries or on those companies. It's harder to prove generally. And as you said, that oil and oil products is going to places that arguably still need it, and don't want to have to pay more for it. And they're not as much worried about exactly the original origin of that oil. So it is harder to stop. But that it might be harder to stop, but Ukraine still knows what's going on. Everybody else knows what's going on too. They're just not going to admit it. It's fairly consistent that this happens everywhere. This is not like a new thing anywhere. Even the oil that you see come out of Venezuela to go into US refineries, it would be needed. It's such a heavy crude that you need to mix it with other oil products from other countries in order to make it not so heavy, just so that their refineries can actually use it. This is normal. Like mixing oil products happens everywhere. And part of the reason that they do that is to avoid the sanctions. It still creates a cost to that product that means that the end amount of money that goes back into the Russian coffers is less than what it would be without those sanctions or without that mixing. So making all these workarounds is still useful, even though it's not a 100% fix to the problem.
And I have a second question, which is more technical. So to get around some of the sanctions when it comes to LNG and to get around some of the restrictions, Russia has drop-off points for ship-to-ship transfers of LNG, and they also get around some of the ship requirements for Arctic tankers. Are they doing similar things with ship-to-ship transfers in the Black Sea as much, or they're just loading up at places like Novorossiysk? Because when it comes to LNG, they're definitely doing ship-to-ship transfers from Yamal, and I think they're also doing that. It's almost officially being done from the Arctic LNG too, one that's completely sanctioned from Novatek. Are they doing something similar with the Black Sea, or they just?
Yeah, so they don't do it in the Black Sea. Most of those tankers portions of those tankers come out of the Black Sea. They do ship-to-ship transfers either in Turkish waters or in Greek or Cypriot waters. There's like known locations where ship-to-ship transfers happen daily. And some of them are legal. Like, don't think that that's just an illegal thing that everybody does. And every single one that you see on satellites is illegal. That's not true. Like that, there are ship-to-ship transfers that happen legally all the time. But if you follow somebody like Tanker Trackers or talk to them about the work that they do, like that's part of what they track every day is that, yeah, oil is coming out, sanctioned oil is coming out of lots of different countries. Pretty much every country that has sanctioned oil has tankers coming out. They go to each of these known places, and there's many of them across the world. They do a ship-to-ship transfer. There's also some over in Asia. So you'll see ships go through the Suez and then do a ship-to-ship transfer over near Singapore or some of those Bangladesh, other places like that. In some cases, you're doing ship-to-ship transfers just because the port that you're actually trying to take the product into isn't big enough to allow your ship in. So especially around Bangladesh, that was one of the biggest things I learned when I first started tracking ships, because I don't have a history in this. I was like, why do they keep going to Bangladesh and then they just friggin' sit there for months? Well, it's because the grain ships sit there for months, and it takes them like a month to unload a grain ship with ship-to-ship transfers into smaller ships and then take it into the Bangladeshi port. That is normal. It happens everywhere. Definitely crude that leaves the Black Sea, that's happening as well. Again, that's another opportunity for mixing and fudging your paperwork and making it look more legal so that the rest of your trip is a legal trip.
Yeah. More questions from chat. So this one is about GPS spoofing from my 2 cents. What is the latest with GPS spoofing? I know a skipper who works on the Finnish archipelago, and he said that for at least 2 years now, they need to at least 2 different GPS apps and 2 different or separate devices in order to safely navigate the waters and still have your trusted plain paper map and compass at hand. How much does this spoofing affect sailing in the Mediterranean compared to the Baltic Sea, for instance?
So I can't tell you the difference between sailing in the Med or the Baltic. I can tell you that one of the numbers that Michelle was able to share with me is that GPS jamming has become so extensive that in 2025, they had over 34,000 vessel incidents of GPS jamming and spoofing. In the Black Sea, for instance, you don't have Ukrainian or ships that are going into Ukrainian ports actually on AIS, and you get massive amounts of spoofing depending on what military ongoings there are in a day. It's absolutely a disaster. In Ukraine, obviously, they're doing it for safety because they're trying not to have such effective access for Russia to be able to track those ships. But just because they're not tracking on AIS on some of the public things that you and I would have access to, they do still have, obviously, they're escorting those ships, but they do have other trackers that those ships are on, and Ukraine knows exactly where those ships are at any given moment. So it's not like they're unsafe shipping practices specifically in that, but yeah, again, as you said, in lots of parts of the world, there's some massive spoofing and jamming issues going on, and it's not just ships; it's tons of people who cover that. It's pretty, and it's getting much worse, and it's actively to prevent people from understanding exactly what's happening out there and being able to track it as well as they can, which I think part of why people have this idea that there are certain partners or allies who can provide certain pieces of information and that nobody else can is because they think that somehow GPS spoofing and jamming and all of these other tricks of the trade make it impossible for people to track that. And it's just not true. It's way more work. But the one thing about shipping is that shipping follows certain paths and it's very predictable. And if a group of people who is transporting sanctions goods finds a safe route, everybody will use that safe route. And so it becomes like very, very predictable. You just have to know where to look. And these aren't hard things to do. It just takes some years of doing it and really paying attention. And it's not something that you can do one day and then turn it off for a week and come later and pick it back up. Like the 24/7 pretty much all the time, but it's absolutely doable, and that information is out there to make it possible. It just takes a lot of work to do it.
Yeah. Thank you. And then just my profile name has another questions. Are there any international plans to strengthen sanctions or on Russian LNG tankers, or does it need drone strikes for effective sanctions on Russia's LNG business? And that's a
Can I start, please?
Yes,
I want
go.
to talk about this so much. So there's a project in Russia called Arctic LNG2. It's sanctioned completely. It stopped operating for a while. It wasn't producing any natural gas to liquefy and put into tankers. And then the Chinese started buying from that project gas illegally, so bypassing sanctions. They selected a specific terminal for gas deliveries, and they started accepting deliveries every month of shipments of 1 or 2 ships. And of course, the UK, which had sanctioned that LNG project, sanctioned that terminal. It's just been 8 months, and the US hasn't still sanctioned that terminal. Like, this is the problem we're facing: non-enforcement of sanctions, secondary sanctions against Chinese entities. We know who's paying for it. We know how they're paying for it. We know the terminal. We know the deliveries. We keep watching the deliveries. It's not a hidden thing. It's on Reuters. Like, it's out in the open, and we need for the US OFAC to actually enforce those sanctions it had placed on that LNG project. This is the issue we're facing with LNG in terms of Russian LNG. In terms of Ukrainian strikes, I don't think they will be effective, because we're talking at places like the northern part of eastern Siberia. We are also talking about places like the Yamal LNG plant, which is, I think, 40% owned by China and 20% owned by European companies. So 60% of that natural gas doesn't even touch the payments don't even touch Russia, but of course it still provides production for Russia, taxes for Russia, for everything. We have taken steps against that in Europe. So what we've done is we've banned transshipments. We should probably look into Belgium, Spain, and France, looking for other sources of LNG. When it comes to banning transshipments, what that does mean is that their tankers come into port in Europe, and there they transfer that LNG for other buyers outside of to other parts of the world, which makes their logistics a lot better. That is going to stop this year, but it could have stopped 2 or 3 years earlier. And also, we could have done work earlier on blocking the ship engines for Russian LNG tankers that are being built within Russia, and also helped Korea do the decision to stop the deliveries of ARC-7 type LNG tankers, which are required for Russia's LNG projects within the Arctic. The good thing is that they're sort of self-sanctioning themselves, because when it comes to Arctic shipments, the northern route that they use for Arctic shipments, it's getting more expensive to hire ships to do transfers there and to do deliveries through it. It's getting more expensive by 50% every year for the last 3 years. It's going to get 50% more expensive this year, so that's eating into their profits. But certainly we could do more on sanctioning the Russian LNG and just getting off it completely. And especially with the transshipment, we're going to make it very hard for them to find cheaper African buyers who rebuy from places like Rotterdam. So yeah, there's a lot we can do here. Exit, do you have anything to add?
First of all, I would co-sign all of that. If you're not following Stanimir, I don't even know why you're here, honestly. Second, I would say you touched on something that I think is really important that people don't really grasp. People who make shipping parts, people who make ships generally, that group of people is not really big. It's actually kind of specified, and Russia can do some of that stuff. They've taken over and kind of recreated some of the pipelines for ship and oil goods that actually used to be what Ukraine made. And they had most of their production for a lot of that stuff in Ukraine. They have been able to recreate parts of that, but it has a lot of issues internally inside Russia, and it is fraught with fraud and stealing money from the government and all the things that you would expect to find in Russian production of pretty much anything. putting more active pressure on the small groups of people who are outside of China and Russia to not supply things that break on ships or ships themselves would be really, really productive. And there's lots of political reasons why people aren't doing a very good job of that. But again, just like the parts of missiles that we're seeing being found that come from the US or all of these different places through Taiwan, all the rest, if people actually worked on stopping the supply of those sanctioned goods or things that should be sanctioned, it would have a fairly quick effect. Like, timeline wise, it's not going to be tomorrow, but it is going to make a big difference in Russia's ability to continue operating on a large, long-term scale. And to your point, we should have done that 3 years ago, and people actually should have enforced them. The problem is that people just aren't enforcing them. That's always the problem with sanctions. They sanction people and then they just don't enforce it. And they need to actually do that. Get serious.
Yeah, thank you. Stanimir, you blinked at me. What's on your heart?
The extra thing I wanted to go over. Yeah, so we had data this week for Russian children's goods sales. So in 2025, they decreased by 8%. But more importantly, things like baby food demand for the second half of 2025 dropped by 12%, and prices for baby food in Russia rose by 44% year over year in the second half of 2025. And I'm bringing this up saying that this is the closest thing now we have to a way to look into what might be hampering Russian birth rates. Because for those who are not aware, Russia made the statistic of live births per year, per month, a state secret, because things are going that bad. We're going back into the levels of the 90s. And we're seeing that, in a way, Putin is waging a war on Russian babies because prices are going up. People are buying less stuff for babies. They're less into planning for kids. And the ones that are still doing that, they're forced to resort to the second-hand market, which has exploded for things like strollers, clothes, shoes. If you had a baby, you know how quickly they grow out of those. So those are also constantly in demand, and now they're mainly traded on Avito rather than the Russian retail network. So that is something I wanted to point out, which was interesting this week that I messed up. That's it.
Yeah. I will answer. I will take one more question before we go to the next segment, because we kind of went through the questions. Matthew asks a question for you guys. We have heard a lot about Ukraine is adopting to take down kamikaze drones, but how is Russia doing so, using expensive Panzer books, etc.? Or are they also using manpad teams? So yeah, Ukraine obviously have a very extensive program, actually many different programs attempting to implement a layered air defense system or network that will be as effective as possible, both economic wise and also actually protecting as much of the Ukrainian skies as possible through various means, being drone to drone interceptions, mobile fire squads, and also traditional air to ground to air missiles and air to air missiles using fighter jets, and also now the last year we've seen a lot of helicopters being used, and yeah, much more actually. There are so many elements to this layered air defense, and yes, Russia obviously have been facing the same challenge with Ukrainian drone strikes. They definitely have done. They've tried to copy Ukraine on the mobile fire squads, I would say. There are also programs both on development of in drone interceptors, and we've seen some examples of that. I haven't seen many examples, or I think I've maybe seen only one example of a Russian drone intercepting a Ukrainian strike drone. There's also been examples where we've seen them using manpads, but I think for the most part they're using AAA and obviously ground-to-air missiles still at quite a large extent. We've seen also multiple incidents where AAA have hit civilian targets in the crossfire, and also where Pantsers, and now the latest this week, there was a massive incident where S-300 or S-400 missiles, two at least, slammed into two separate apartment buildings. So it's safe to say that the Russians have massive issues with dealing with the Ukrainian long-range drone strikes. Yeah, but they do intercept a lot of them. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
I think also they use like private, the as far as I remember, Stanimir, we were talking about how the Russians have private security companies that look after some of the refineries, and the states kind of like said that it's kind of their problem. Is that accurate?
Yes, but it was a shit show. So
right.
They also said that they were counting their bullets. And they said the problem is if the target gets hit and you expend the bullets, but you fail to hit them, you have to write tons of reports for every bullet expended, because the bullets are kept on lock and are counted and meticulously followed through an immense amount of busy work bureaucracy, just to show that people in positions of power have actual jobs, rather than to find out that they're doing mostly nothing. So what happened was that it was far more advantageous for the guards who were actually assigned to guard these refineries with these guns to not shoot at the incoming drones and let them hit, because it was worse to shoot and not hit than for it to be hit. So they are not effective currently, and I don't think if that system remains in place, they will be effective, because this is the mindset of the Russian bureaucracy, to track things and keep this amount of paperwork because it needs fall guys when things go wrong, rather than actual solutions.
Yeah. So I think, like, to oversimplify it, right? Like, Ukraine has properly integrated their air defense and their drone defense programs. Whereas in Russia, you have this sort of competing sense of resources and responsibilities among different like groups in the Russian system and the security structure. And they don't always, a lot of the time, they're trying to figure out how to make it not their problem versus it being integrated properly. So it's not integrated properly, basically. So yeah, I think that's, I don't know, like a good summary of the situation. Erlend?
Yeah, I think we should probably ask Vincent if he can come in and talk about this, because it's kind of his expertise. Vincent is a French analyst that is part of Tochnyi, and he's he has a lot more knowledge about Russian air defenses than most people do. So, but yeah, there are huge differences. But the funny thing is that they kind of had the same. They had the same architecture, even just a decade ago, Ukraine and Russia. So we should probably pick Vincent's brain on that. Now, what happened this week other than ships and drone strikes, Joseph?
Oh boy! So we had the Davos Economic Forum, I think it's called. Yeah, the World Economic Forum in Davos, and it's a big old event. We have a lot of world leaders attend it, and they're discussing economy and international relations. We're not super interested in the economy stuff. It's all AI nonsense. Doesn't matter. But there's some kind of I don't know. It feels there's like definitely a mood to this World Economic Forum this year. So we thought we'd talk about it just a little bit. So I think we're going to move with like we're going to look at like 4 different speakers. There were more speakers. We'll maybe talk about a few more if it comes up, but we've tried to like frame this thing as best we can and give it some kind of structure. So I think the first we need to talk a little bit about is Trump. Trump not only had a speech at Davos, but the U.S. also released something called the National Security Strategy document recently. And that was like last Friday that this was published. Basically, the document says what Trump said at Davos, which is sort of like Europe is on its own. Like the U.S. is going to focus on, the Western Hemisphere and Asia and Europe. I would say both Trump and the document vacillate between saying things that are nice about Europe, or that saying like Europe has enough economic strength to kind of look after itself, something like that, versus also like we're competing with Europe and we don't like them, and they've been too dependent on us and things like that. So it's like like a carrot and stick or something with Europe. So that's basically the kind of going in, I would say, that the general attitude, and everyone's reacting to that, to kind of Trump's realignment of U.S. priorities. So from there, I think we'll go in like a gradient of what I would call like blue pilled to black pilled takes on this new development, with I think a lot of other European leaders in between. We're going to just sort of classify, I would say, Macron as the most, like, I'm putting it on a gradient of like hopeful to maybe cynical is not the right word, but like pragmatic maybe, from like inspirational to pragmatic. Let's call it that. So Macron, I think, was the most inspirational. He said what everyone else was kind of saying, which was that like we're moving away from a rules-based international order and more towards either what people are calling like a great power system, like the old days, where they were the concert of Europe and all that. Or we're moving more towards like a world just where coercion matters more than, international law and things like that. And this was echoed, I would say, by pretty much every European leader at Davos. But I would say Macron kind of was the one person who was saying, but the EU is kind of an institution that can like weather all these problems, and we just kind of need to put our faith in the EU and work out some of the kinks in the EU. And I would say he had a very memeable moment in his speech where he said "for sure" a lot, and a lot of great memes coming out of that. The sunglasses also, he did the speech in full sunglasses. So I don't know. There was a lot of spectacle with Macron. He had a lot to say, and I don't know, if you're looking for something more hopeful out of all of this, he's probably the one to listen to. Then we move. Oh, go ahead, Erlend.
I just wanted to mention that, you said a lot of the European leaders did mention some of the same things, but I think he kind of embodied it and expressed it in the best way, and the sunglasses maybe helped him along the way. Macron is one of the European leaders that we remember, at least with myself. If I think about it now, it's Macron that's for some reason managed to again take the stage away from everyone else.
Yeah, I think he definitely proved himself to be the most charismatic world leader, or like in this moment, he had the most charisma in terms of like, if you're a news organization and you want to show like a speech from the World Economic Forum, most of them chose either, obviously your country's leader would be commonly cited, but I'd say he was the one that most people would clip and, mention. So yeah, I think he kind of embodied the moment the best in terms of his speech and his demeanor and his sunglasses and his foreshures. So then moving next to Carney. I think Carney is more pragmatic, but still a bit kind of, I guess, hopeful or like looking for a path forward. So Carney was talking again about, rules-based international order has suffered a rupture, and that we're moving to an era of great power rivalry. So as I said, this is like the common theme. But then the question is like, how do you respond to that? Carney's central message was about the idea of middle powers. So he considers Canada a middle power. I don't know. I'm not Canadian, but it seems like Canada's a member of the G7, and I'd say they're a pretty big economic power. But I can understand that Canada sort of sees itself as a middle power, and it's dealing with the U.S. and China, and like countries that have legacy military power like Russia and so forth. These countries that are middle powers are in a difficult position right now. And the best solution is to act collectively. So, there's a bunch of smaller countries that are going to get pushed around in this new world order. The best response they can have is to all work together to try to reinforce a new set of boundaries that will result in them not being taken advantage of as badly by the great powers. Did you want to say anything else about Carney, Erlend?
No, but I think maybe Exit could have some input there.
Yeah.
I would just say we are definitely a middle power. I think anybody who thinks that we're not thinks we're bigger than we are. We might have a big landmass, but economic wise, I think we're a middle power. And I think if you look at the size of our military, that probably would explain everything you need to know.
Yeah, I think Canada definitely sees itself as a middle power, but I don't know. I think that the military could be expanded, and the economy is not that small by global standards. But I mean, Italy's a G7 country too, and it's definitely when we're talking about the United States and China and so forth, it's definitely there's a difference there.
But yeah, about the speech specifically that Carney held, I think it is quite significant, even though a lot of his points have been iterated by many European leaders. But I think he was maybe one of the most clear on the fact that the world order as we knew it before is kind of the past, and we have to now look forward through with the eyes on the realities of today, and that there is maybe some real pragmatic shift or a schism that happening, and that we may look back on this time period as a schism between the past world order, where international law was enforced not just by the US but by the West as a collective, and where that is no longer is the case, because it seems like the rules-based order is in question, or at least. So I think that it was very significant, and he was very frank and honest in his speech, and I think that stood out, and probably also affected how a lot of the other leaders spoke later.
Yep. And I think I guess the one other thing I would mention about Carney is Canada just concluded some kind of a economic deal with China. I think there's a lot of European countries talking about that right now. There's a lot of kind of talk about maybe using China as a bit of a wedge or leverage against the U.S. in terms of showing the U.S. that there is an alternative, and you can't just push Europe around all the time and threaten to invade. China did attend and had a speech, and I would say the speech was basically like, we're open for business. We don't like all this tariffing and whatnot. You can come to us. We're dependable, something like that. So that was maybe another theme of the World Economic Forum, was like trying to balance U.S. interests or power with some other force, and maybe China, maybe Europe. Okay, and then the final participant we want to talk about is, of course, Zelensky. Zelensky had a speech that I would say was like the most pragmatic or the most frank. He wasn't kind of, he wasn't dealing in hope. He was trying to deal in practical reality. And he opened his speech with kind of an interesting analogy, which is Groundhog's Day. He basically said that he feels like he's in the film Groundhog's Day with Bill Murray, and that he was here last year basically making the same speech, who have the same mindset. And he did his best to try to talk about the necessity of European defense autonomy, making sure that they are able to produce things and rely less on the United States, He called on Europe to kind of re-examine its red lines with Russia, specifically the frozen Russian assets, and also seizing Shadow Fleet tankers, which of course we talked a lot about today. So, he's saying that Europe needs to stop arbitrarily setting up these red lines for itself, and then we have to go through the song and dance where we slowly decide, okay, maybe we can move this red line. And then he talked about security guarantees that, in order to stabilize Europe and have a secure Europe and a security architecture that works in Europe, there has to be some kind of a long-term security guarantee that incorporates Ukraine in. And, reflecting on some of his other speeches lately, he's kind of said, without Ukraine to be the backbone of a European military, Europe doesn't really have a strong, core to its military powers. So I think he's really trying to offer Ukraine to Europe as the security linchpin moving forward. And he's saying, we can do that for you, but in order to do that, we need to create a security framework that gives us a guarantee of our security. So that's pretty much his, take on the whole thing is, I need to stop making the same speech to the same people, and we need to have an evolution in mindset in Europe. Europe needs to become more independent, and they need to re-examine their red lines with Russia, and then form an autonomous strategic Europe with a independent military capabilities that Ukraine is able to anchor to. Anything else about that, Erlend?
Well, I just wanted to kind of air the idea that this has been a pattern of messaging that the Ukrainians have told Western powers, especially European leaders, behind closed doors. And we have seen kind of excerpts and leaked statements and messages from the Ukrainians to the European leaders over the last 3.5 years. That is very much in line with exactly what he said in the speech, and now he basically it kind of my perspective on this is that he kind of gave up on doing this behind closed doors, and now he's speaking directly to the European populations, and also much more importantly, in my opinion, in this specific context, to European business leaders. And European business leaders obviously will have a lot of influence over policy in Europe, because obviously they have a quite powerful lobby system, and also are in dialogue with governments all the time. So I think he's trying to wake up those minds to see that Europe really needs to get its shit together, and that we've been asleep for 3.5 years.
Yeah, I think there was some reaction to it. As I said, this is a bit of a slightly doomer take. I would maybe describe it more as pragmatic, but I think some people took it as maybe a little bit negative, I guess is maybe the word to use. And I think they would make the argument that if you want to get people motivated to help and to participate, you want to be more like Macron, right? You want to be more selling hope and getting people behind a cause that they can contribute to, that they see as moving forward, right? But I don't know. We have Macron already, right? He already, if you want that, you can buy what he's got. But I think Zelensky is, maybe has to play bad cop here and tell Europe that this stuff can't wait. That Europe faces a very imminent security crisis, and the best opportunity for them to solve this problem in the medium term is to integrate Ukraine into their security architecture and rebuild their own internal capacity for projecting military force. So I think the world can live with both of those approaches, and hopefully Europe will listen to Zelensky, but they'll kind of vibe with Macron. I don't know.
So, yeah, thank you. But now I want to put you guys a little bit on the limb here. So I've chosen the 4 pictures of the four leaders that we spoke of and asked the question, who's out? And one thing we didn't mention was obviously that the World Economic Forum started on what we could see, or probably say, has been the most dramatic tensions between the US and Europe for as long as I can remember, at least, because of the whole drama about Greenland, the threats that to take over Greenland by military powers, repeatedly stated by some of the members of the White House, and the president refusing for a very long time to rule out military power as an option, and also the repeated obvious messaging from Trump himself that they need Greenland for some sort of reason, and they are definitely going to get Greenland. So a lot of what happened at Davos was kind of in the light of that. But I would say, or my question is, who managed to get the attention and the message on their track at Davos? And was it Ukraine? Was it Europe? Was it the US? And who actually kind of lost out in this whole conference? Who does have the final word? Is it Europe, or is it NATO, or is it Ukraine? Who's out? So I'll ask you, Exit. Who do you think is out, and who do you think stays in?
Gosh, I was just thinking about this, and I don't know that I know the answer to this. I admit that I am much more paying attention to the minutiae at Davos than I am to the big speeches. And to be honest, all of the big speeches might be meant to send messages, but I don't think we know how effective those messages are until we get like a month down the line. So I would say I don't have an answer.
Okay, I'll frame it differently. Who do you think stands out? And it doesn't need to be nor in a positive or nor in a negative way.
For me, Zelensky stood out.
Okay, that's a good answer. Stanimir, do you have any thoughts about this? Who do you think stands out, or who do you think is the odd one out?
I will pass and focus on the area of expertise I'm following right now. I've learned my lesson to not stay out of my line.
Okay, that's fine. Joseph?
I guess who, again, I think I kind of already made the case, but I think Macron was the most.
Hey, then he leaves. What's up?
I think Macron was most suited for the moment. But I think memeability is really important in 2026, I guess. Like the fact that you can distill down like your whole your broader thoughts into like a quotable line or something like that people respond more to in the world of social media that lives on 20-second clips and YouTube shorts and everything. That's like a really important aspect. In terms of like who did the worst or who's out, I guess if you had to name someone, probably Trump. I don't think if you look at Davos as like an opportunity to like present your economic strategy and your geopolitical strategy and how that impacts your economic strategy, I don't think Trump did a great job explaining his economic strategy is still a bit incomprehensible. He's kind of all over the place. He's talking about affordability. He's talking about Greenland, which, by the way, he called Iceland. He's talking about, I don't know. He had a lot of different things that he kind of just mentioned in passing, and none of it really added up to a coherent vision for like economics or geopolitics. So, I don't know. It seems like Europe is more on the same page right now, and there's like multiple people speaking for Europe, whereas Trump is one person, but it's not. It seems like multiple people are speaking through him or something like that. So I would say right now, like if you're just looking at it purely as like the goal of the speech is to elucidate your views, Trump didn't do the best job he could have.
And I'll put myself on the line, and I'll say that I feel that Trump is the odd one out, and I think that they made whoever prepared a speech made a massive mistake, because they played up to Davos with the whole Greenland thing, and I think his speech was incredibly boring for most of the time. He was trying to do some sort of campaigning, as you mentioned, proving that they're doing so well, while it was just very boring compared to what we're used to with Trump. And then when he eventually mentioned Greenland, he was all over the place and saying Iceland at least 3 times about Greenland, and everyone was just waiting for him talking about Greenland. And it was, I think it made himself as irrelevant as he could have possibly done for this Davos meeting, which stands out very much, and the others had very impactful speeches, in my opinion.
Yeah, we should probably wrap up. There is one crazy theory that people have. I'm not sure if it might be giving Trump too much credit, but the theory goes that he basically started this whole Greenland tantrum to kind of throw Europe off balance for Davos, because basically he wants them to keep their nose out of Iran and the Ukraine peace deal. And by doing that, he got Europe all worried about this Greenland stuff, and he's managed to kind of get his Abu Dhabi thing going, and whatever's going on with Iran. But I don't know. I think that's maybe giving Trump a little too much credit. I think he's probably making it up as he goes along, and we'll kind of see what happens. But that is one theory people are tossing out there. I thought it might be worth at least acknowledging its existence.
Yep. And then obviously also at Davos, Ukraine had its own Ukraine house, and Exit. I know you wanted to give us some thoughts that you had from what actually happened at the Ukraine house in Davos.
Yeah. So first of all, obviously that the stuff that goes off at Ukraine houses, a lot of it is pre-scripted, and they know exactly what's going to happen. There's a whole bunch of signings and stuff that happen. Lots of investments get announced there. But for the last 3 years, I've made a point of watching each of the live streams, and going back over the next couple of weeks and watching each of the live streams. And it never fails that I pick up some really interesting tidbits along the way of stuff that I maybe didn't see because there's just too much to cover, or investment that I encourage people to go back and watch some of those. I know one of the things is that I've watched so far that didn't occur to me, and gosh, I don't know why I feel like I completely missed this, but one of the investment people that was talking about how investable Ukraine will be going forward, specifically mentioned that the fact that they're having to rebuild all of their infrastructure right now, it's obviously that's that is that they have a more decentralized system with much newer infrastructure in many different areas than most countries would have. And imagining that we get to the end of this war and a time of relative peace, that does mean that when other companies try and go into Ukraine and actually develop and set up businesses that can run there, the infrastructure that they are able to do that is set up, build a big plant, or all of these other kinds of major investments. You have to tie into existing infrastructure, and sometimes that can literally cost you like huge portions of your budget just because you're having to upgrade the infrastructure because the country doesn't have the funds to upgrade it. And that won't be a problem for Ukraine in a lot of places because it will have been forcibly upgraded. Is that a lot of it Ukraine equipment donated, or they're already getting the financing for it. So that's not something the country ever wants to do. And that's why you don't see countries doing it. But the end product for what Ukraine is going to be as an investable country going forward is actually a huge bonus to them. And that's like one tiny piece that stuck out to me, but there's lots of really interesting little bits that you pick up if you like listening to stuff while you're working away on other things. I would definitely encourage you to go back and listen to some of those live streams.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that is going to sum it up. Tonight we went kind of way over the normal 2-hour streams, but this was very interesting, and I really want to thank you, Exit, so much for joining us, and I hope that we can have you back on the stream in not too long. It was way too long since last time you were at our stream, Exit.
Well, that's because you never ask me, but I mean, you could.
I'll take that blame. You're right. But yes, and also thank you so much for the work that you're doing for the community, and also I'm interested in looking at if you're gonna reopen the Ukraine corridor monitoring project, or if you're gonna start with something else, because of in light of what is actually happening right now.
I am not reopening that project, but I have lots of other projects. If anybody wants to work with me, you just hit me up in DMs and I have places to put you to work.
Everyone, please go follow Exit266 on Twitter and Blue Sky. She is a fantastic source of information. And yeah, thank you again for joining. Joseph, do you have any final words?
Oh, just thanks, of course, for a panel. I'm contractually obligated to thank myself because Germany to Ukraine's here. Of course, thanks to chat. We appreciate all your questions. It really helps us get some feedback on what you guys are interested in. So I'm sure our guests also appreciated your questions. So keep them coming, chat. And thanks to everyone who watches the videos later on. We know not everyone can make it to live. We'll see everyone next week, same time, 2100 Kyiv time. Check out Tochnyi.info. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.
On behalf of the brave.